Emily's going to share just for a few minutes about the Navajo Reservation. You guys know she was just down there shortly. So, yeah, just take a few and let us know.
Okay. So, for those who don't know, God has been giving me a heart for Native Americans and having no clue what that means or looks like. And my roommate moved in not knowing that she's Native American and she's Navajo, and her family's been inviting me down for about a year. I've been walking through a lot of things with her, and so they keep asking me to come down. And then I was asked to intercede at a Native American event up in Castle Rock, and had gotten a word for one of the leaders, and he happened to be the Navajo man, and it ended up being his Navajo name. And so like instantly there was a connection between him and his daughter, and they invited me down to this camp meeting. And so like it was a 8-day thing, and we stayed in tents there on it, and there were like 25 of us that stayed there at the church, but there were about 500 different people that came down. And I actually stopped at my roommate's grandparents' house on the way down, and got to herd sheep. That was a very fun experience, and catch baby lambs to take them away from their moms. And I was amazed at how honoring the Navajo are. And so they invited, I've met Amanda's aunts, but I never met her uncles. So they invited them over, and they were like, who is this granddaughter that they've adopted? And so they were calling themselves Grandma and Grandpa. And then at the camp, there are definitely different stories I can share, but I think the biggest thing that stood out to me is this was such a different mission trip than I've ever been on. And I went with the mindset of like, I have to serve, I have to serve, I have to serve. And I'm used to like building something and doing something when I'm on a trip. And so I felt kind of useless for a little bit, because what God actually he told me I was going down for was to hear and see, and that he wanted me to, I was building relationships and just getting vision for what he's doing. And so at first I started serving because I couldn't help myself, and just started helping with registration. But about 2.5 days in, I was just like, I can't do this. Like, I feel like I can't hear God. I'm missing worship every single time. I'm like, I don't feel like I'm even connecting with God or the people. And I thought I'd be able to build relationship through registering everyone, but there were so many people that it was like this busy, fast thing. And so I didn't even say anything. I just stopped doing it and let other people do it, and started going to the church services. And I was kind of embarrassed at first, because I felt really not like a very good Christian. So sorry, trying to hear what direction I should go. So partway through, I won't go into details, but something traumatic happened, and it was really painful. So I was kind of broken for a lot of the trip, and it was the whole trip. I felt guilty. I felt like I wasn't, again, just not a good Christian. And the other thing that surprised me on this trip was that I couldn't hear God like I always hear God. And it was different. It was like as soon as I stepped there, I was like, the way I know God and the way I relate and the giftings I have, like this level it's not enough anymore. Like it's gonna have to change. And it was such a weird experience. And like through this trauma, though, the family who runs the church, who are the people who invited me down, they just like gathered around me, and they just embraced me, and they walked through it, and like everyone that was staying at the camp walked through it, and it was really interesting because I felt like I wasn't accomplishing what God wanted me to, and I felt needy, and I felt like everyone else was giving to me. And but then there would be moments where people would just thank me, and just thank me for having the courage and strength to just go through it all and to stay there. And it brought like a weird, not weird, but it was just weird how it happened, that it brought like an honor towards me from them. And like, and like it just ended up, I didn't even, things just happened so naturally through all of it, that I felt like I said, I felt like I wasn't really doing anything. I was spending time with people. I was like going on bike runs and, just hanging out with people and stuff. And so, but by the end of the trip, a side story, there was this 12-year-old boy who was driving me bonkers when I was doing registration. He was like such a bad kid. And he was constantly like causing issues and coming up to me, and I was having to fix them, and I was just like, God, please just take this kid somewhere else. But like after the trauma happened, I do prophetic art, and so I actually, honestly, I just started doing it to save my life, just to be able to connect with God again, to be able to like even be able to make it through the time. And when I took my stuff in, I just wanted to be with God, and I went into we were doing sanctuary in a tent, like a big tent. So when I went there and I just wanted to paint, and I had some of my other supplies with me, and then this kid comes up, the kid that I didn't want to be around me. And he comes up, and he's just like, what are you doing? And I told him, and I told him that I'm painting like what God shows me. Well, I said, I'm doing prophetic art. He's like, what's that? And I'm like, I'm painting what God shows me. And he's like, how do you do that? And so I was kind of explaining it to him, and then I was like, well, so much for painting. Guess I'm doing a picture for him. And so I started, I just had a vision, and I started doing pastels of a picture, and it was so incredible. And at the end, and he sat there. This kid does not sit still, and he doesn't stay quiet, and he sat the entire time. And I probably took like 30 minutes doing this thing. And he just sat there the entire time watching me. And then at the end, I was like, do you want to know what it means? And he said, yes. And I told him, and it was about him and who he is and who God called him to be, and what God has for his future and destiny and everything. And a couple times he didn't know what I was talking about, and I'd have to clarify and stuff. And then I was like, would you like to keep it? And he was like, yes. And I don't know if Navajo are very stoic, a lot of them, so there's like no expression going on, but like you could tell he was getting a little bit emotional. And so he took it, and I was like, well, that was kind of cool. Okay, well then I had a shadow for the rest of the trip, and so like this kid was constantly around me after this, like so the opposite of what I wanted happened. But he was always wanting to see, was I going to do art? Was I going to do another thing? And like I even went on a hike, and he followed me up to the top of the mountain. Wanted to see if I was going to paint, and it ends up there was a kids' church service going on too, and they did an art night one night, and it just ends up he's amazingly talented, and so it just like he changed though, you guys, like he changed so much after that, and he actually started getting involved with everybody, and he started going to the church services and started anytime he wasn't in school, his grandma lived next door to the church. And his mom's on meth, and he lives with his grandma. He doesn't have anything to do with the rest of his family, and so every time he'd get home from school, he'd like come over and he'd be hanging out and everything, and so like it was kind of interesting. I have to say that like with that and the traumatic event, I actually lost all privacy. Like everyone was around all the time, and by the end of the trip, at one point, I've had a vision of doing a community center down there, and at one point, God showed me, this is where you're going to do it. This is where it's supposed to be. And I was like, wait, you want me to come back here after this? and so I actually was not very happy. But then I shared it with Callie, who's the daughter of the pastor, and her and I, because of what happened, her and I had an instant bond and became really good friends. We're like sisters now, and I told her the vision that God had given me for the community center, and she's like, what? She's just like looking at me dumbfounded throughout the whole thing, and I'm like, what is wrong? Like, I'm like, okay, I don't have to do this. And she was like, no, she's like, we have that same vision. Like, we wrote it down, and we've been praying that someone would come out here and do this, so then she was like, you have to talk to my parents, and you have to talk to the rest of my family, and I actually didn't even share it until the last day with all of them, and so it was interesting. So I'm still hearing God and praying about like what that looks like, what that means, because I don't actually want to move there, and I feel like I actually don't have peace about that, and I feel like I'm going to be going back and forth for a while, and most likely training them to actually do it, because that's what I actually do. I'll eventually leave anyway. So, but the cool thing about it is that originally I was looking at Amanda's family for doing it, because that was my first realm of influence, and her whole family, after I walked through some things with her whole family actually came up to meet me and to welcome me into their family and stuff, and so I thought it was going towards them, and they're not believers and all that, and that doesn't really matter. They can still do a community center, but when I went there, I didn't have peace, and actually it felt really, really uncomfortable there. And but then when I was with the church, which they're like 2.5 hours away, they have a realm of influence already. They already reached the Navajo. They also speak. He's a prophetic speaker. He speaks all over the nation. Callie is a worship leader. She is actually got an award for the top Navajo singer, and so she sings all over the nation. And so I was like, these are people who already have influence. They're the ones that are already touching their community and already doing something. And so it was when I was driving home, I was just like, gosh, did I accomplish anything? Like, did anything happen? And I hadn't like processed all this stuff yet, and I still was like, I'm a horrible missionary. But then it just realized that like, well, God said it was for relationship building and vision, and that's exactly what He did. And there are other little things, but yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. Well, we'll keep track of how this is forming up, and.